If you think the Byzantine Empire was all saints and scholars, monks and mosaics, think again, because hidden beneath the golden domes of Constantinople was a truth too disturbing for the history books. Boys, taken or traded, were castrated, silenced, and shaped not for the church, but for the whims of emperors. They were called eunuchs, but behind that word was a life of service wrapped in trauma, obedience cloaked in silk. Some became loyal courtiers, others were groomed for the imperial bedchamber, and a few had climbed so high in the palace ranks they ruled behind the throne itself. In a world where power was everything, they were seen as perfect servants, incapable of betrayal, incapable of legacy, but not incapable of pain. If you think history remembered them with dignity, then you don't know Byzantium. If you're drawn to untold stories, dark history, and the lives that were erased in the shadows of power, hit that like button and subscribe. This is a corner of history you won't hear in school. This is the dark truth of the male concubines of the Byzantine Empire, and their story starts now. To the outside world, the Byzantine Empire dazzled like a crown of gold. Glittering mosaics, imperial processions, the whispered chants of monks in Hagia Sophia, these were the images that shaped centuries of awe. But beyond the ceremonial splendor, behind velvet curtains and marble corridors, the empire kept secrets. One of them was its peculiar obsession with eunuchs. Unlike many cultures that discarded or marginalized castrated men, Byzantium elevated them. In the eyes of the imperial court, eunuchs were perfect tools, loyal, disciplined, and most importantly, sterile. They posed no threat to dynasties, could not father heirs, and were thought to have no lusts of their own. And so boys, many of them taken from conquered regions or purchased in secret, were subjected to the knife, stripped of their future, and reborn into service. From the outside, they wore silk and gold. Inside, they bore scars no robe could hide. What made the Byzantines embrace such cruelty as strategy? The answer lies not just in survival, but in the empire's obsession with control, purity, and power. Because in the palace of emperors, even the mutilated could be weaponized. Beneath the ceremonial robes and public grandeur of Constantinople, another world simmered in silence. A world not captured in gilded mosaics or holy scripture. While eunuchs manned the gates of power, some were not merely servants of the court, but of the emperor himself. Inside the imperial palace, where privacy was absolute and tongues were trained to remain still, whispers of male concubines, youthful slaves chosen for their beauty and pliability, were buried under layers of religious hypocrisy and imperial protocol. Though the Byzantine Empire proudly declared itself the beacon of Christian virtue, behind closed doors, emperors indulged in desires that would have scandalized the church if the church had dared confront the throne. These boys, often seized or purchased in youth, were reshaped by their masters, castrated not just in flesh, but in identity. To survive, they learned to mimic charm, submission, and silence. Their existence, never officially acknowledged, served as a brutal reminder that even in the holiest empire on earth, human bodies could still be currency. They were hidden in plain sight, behind veils, behind titles, behind fear, and their silence was as carefully curated as any imperial proclamation. Life for the male concubines of Byzantium was a paradox of splendor and suffering. Within the high walls of the great palace, they were draped in fine silk, adorned with jewelry, and surrounded by marble fountains and perfumed gardens. But these luxuries were not gifts, they were gilded chains. The more beautiful the cage, the harder it was to escape. These boys were not just possessions, they were performances, trained to dance, sing, serve, and please. Every movement, every glance was rehearsed for the pleasure of their master. And their master, often the emperor himself, or a noble too powerful to be refused, held complete dominion over their lives. They were stripped of their pasts, no families, no futures, no names of their own. Most had been taken as children, severed from their origins and physically altered to ensure submission. Castration was more than a brutal act. It was a ritual erasure of identity. To the outside world, they were invisible. To the court, they were property. But behind their eyes burned a quiet awareness of just how fragile their place in the empire truly was. One misstep, one frown, and they could vanish, forgotten by history like so many before them. In the silent corridors of the imperial palace, affection was a liability, and love a treasonous game. Among the eunuchs and concubines, whispers of tenderness were dangerous currency. For the rare few who dared to form emotional bonds, secrecy became their only shield. But desire is not so easily controlled. Some concubines found themselves drawn to others in the harem, sharing quiet moments of stolen humanity behind marble columns and silken curtains. Others, in rarer cases, found themselves the object of the emperor's intense fascination, not just as servants, but as muses, as obsessions. This was a perilous elevation. To be favored was to rise above the others, to be lavished with attention, gifts, and the illusion of power. But it also meant walking a razor's edge. Affection could turn to suspicion overnight. A jealous rival's whisper or a shift in the emperor's mood could lead to isolation, punishment, or worse. Some concubines, desperate to survive or escape their fate, tried to manipulate their influence, forming secret alliances with palace officials, or even plotting escape. But within the walls of Byzantium, the line between a lover and a pawn was dangerously thin, and most who dared to play the game were crushed beneath its weight. In Byzantium, favor was fleeting, as fragile as a whispered scandal. One moment a concubine could bask in the glow of the emperor's affection, the next be cast into darkness without warning. There were no warnings, no farewells, only silence and exile. Some fell from grace for reasons no one ever learned. A misinterpreted glance, a political shift, or simply the emperor's boredom could seal their fate. They were reassigned to distant corners of the palace, stripped of silken jewels and left in cold, bare rooms to contemplate the emptiness of their rise. Others were publicly disgraced. Whispers would spread like wildfire, accusations of betrayal, forbidden trysts, or sorcery. The imperial court, always hungry for bloodless entertainment, devoured the spectacle of their undoing. And while many were banished, some met even darker ends, quietly disposed of by palace guards in the dead of night. There were no tombs, no farewells, no names remembered. Their erasure was intentional, because to remember them would be to confront the cruelty of a system that used them up and discarded them. Their stories weren't recorded in chronicles, not because they lacked importance, but because their suffering was too inconvenient to preserve. And yet, even in silence, their shadows linger in the marble halls they once walked. They were born into a world that never intended to remember them. No statues, no legends, no family names. The male concubines of Byzantium, castrated, silenced, cloistered, were meant to vanish the moment their usefulness faded. But even history's darkest corners cast shadows that refused to disappear. Some of these boys, against all odds, rose to quiet power. Their proximity to the emperor made them confidants, whisperers in his ear, and sometimes the invisible hand behind imperial decisions. But even then, their power was borrowed, never their own. They had no heirs to continue their bloodlines, no legacy but the fear they inspired, or the rumors they left behind. The legacy they leave us isn't found in grandeur, but in the questions they force us to ask. How do empires justify human sacrifice for control? How many were forced to surrender their bodies so the state could maintain its illusion of order? Their pain wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Today we rarely speak their names, yet echoes of their suffering live on in every modern institution that treats human beings as tools, not souls. These were not just victims of an empire's cruelty, they were the sons it never wanted to claim. And now, centuries later, we say what history would not. They were real, they mattered, and they deserved better. If this story moved you, consider giving it a like so others can find it too. And if you want more forgotten histories, hidden truths, and stories they never taught you in school, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I release new episodes like this every week, dark, honest, and unforgettable. Let me know in the comments, what do you think was the true cost of power in Byzantium? And whose story should we tell next? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of Dark Lore.